This is part 10 of the series, The Basics of Geometry. And in this section, we're going to look at two very closely related ideas. We've actually skirted around these issues in the end of the last video. We looked at problems that used this idea without actually explicitly stating the ideas that we're dealing with here. The first one is that of complementary angles. Complementary angles are simply two angles whose measures sum up to 90 degrees. Now, please don't say something like the complementary angles are angles that equal 90 degrees. That's not the case. Notice these two angles do not both equal 90 degrees. Precision is an important aspect. It may seem trivial, but it's really not. It's an important part of correctly expressing your ideas in geometrical terms. So these are two adjacent angles that add up to 90 degrees. These are two non-adjacent angles that add up to 90 degrees. They don't have to be adjacent angles. It's just, the requirement is just that they be two angles whose the sum of their measures adds up to 90 degrees. Now that's related to the idea of supplementary angles. Supplementary angles are two angles whose measures sum to 180 degrees. Now we've seen this before. This picture was the same basic picture that we used for a straight angle. This angle here is a straight angle. And as we know, straight angles have a measure equal to 180 degrees. So this angle plus this angle is 180 degrees. These two angles are non-adjacent angles whose measures sum to 180 degrees. And so both of these angle pairs are supplementary angles. So complementary, supplementary angle pairs. Now, as a side note, it's sometimes difficult for people to remember which one's which. So I'm just going to give you a silly little trick that might help you to distinguish which one is which. So let's start with complementary. And you spell complementary, C-O-M-P-L-E, and so on and so forth, right? Take the C and put a line through it here. What do you get? 90. So complementary gives you 90. And if you look at supplementary, you get 180. So it's just a quick little thing that might help you. It might not. But complementary angles add up to 90 degrees, and supplementary angles add up to 180 degrees. All right, let's move on. You'll note in this next word, linear pair, that we're using the same basic picture we used in our supplementary angles picture. And a linear pair is simply two adjacent angles whose non-common sides form opposite rays. So here we have a non-common side. This angle has this side. This side is common to both angles. This side is not common with this angle. This side is not common with this angle. So these two non-common sides form a pair of opposite rays. And so whenever you have that picture, you have the situation where you have a linear pair. And as we can see from this picture, these angles are supplementary. So you can see that linear pairs are going to be supplementary. That is, the sum of their measures is 180 degrees. And so anytime you have two adjacent angles whose non-common sides form opposite rays, you're going to have adjacent angles because you're going to have linear pairs. Let's say that you see it like this. There is a linear pair, one here, one here, or this way, here and here. Anytime you have two lines that intersect, you're going to have four pairs of opposite rays. Here's one pair, here's a second pair, here's a third pair, and a fourth pair. So anytime you have two lines intersecting, you're going to have 4 pairs of opposite rays. And all those linear pairs are supplementary. All right, let's look at the next idea here. Now we have vertical angles. Now with linear pairs, we were using adjacent angles. So angle 1 and 2 here are a linear pair, but angle 1 and 3 are non-adjacent angles, and two non-adjacent angles whose sides form 2 pairs of opposite rays. So here's 1 pair of opposite rays, here's 2 pairs of opposite rays. You have a vertical angle pair. Angle 1 and angle 3 are vertical angles. Angle 2 and angle 4 are vertical angles. So angle pair 1 and 3, 2 and 4. Here the same thing. We had 1, 2 were linear pairs, 2, 3 were linear pairs, 3, 4, and 1, 4. But angle 1 and 3 are vertical angles, 2 and 4 are vertical angles. Now you're going to learn later on the relationship between vertical angles, but since we're going through it now, I'm just going to briefly introduce it to you. If we knew, let's just say for the sake of discussion, that this angle was 40 degrees. This angle would have to then be 140 because these two angles are supplementary because they're a linear pair. Well, these two are supplementary, so they're a linear pair. Let me rephrase that. These are supplementary because they're a linear pair. These are a pair of adjacent angles whose non-common sides form opposite rays, so they're a linear pair. So these two are a linear pair. That means this one has to be 40 as well. Notice, if this one's 40 and this one's 40, angle 1 and angle 3 are congruent angles because they have the same measure. And since angle 1 and angle 3 are vertical angles, those two angles are congruent. So you know that vertical angles are always going to be congruent angles. Likewise, angle 3 and 4 is a linear pair. So if this is 40, this one has to be 140, which makes angle 2 and 4 congruent. And as we just said, angle 2 and 4 are a vertical angle pair, and so those angles are congruent. So just to recap, we have complementary angles are two angles whose measures sum up to 90 degrees. They can be adjacent or non-adjacent. Supplementary angles are two angles whose measures sum up to 180 degrees. They can be adjacent or non-adjacent. Linear pairs are two adjacent angles, they must be adjacent, whose non-common sides form opposite rays. So these are supplementary. And vertical angles are non-adjacent angles, any two non-adjacent angles whose sides form 2 pairs of opposite rays. And vertical angles are always congruent. All right, well that sums up the basics of geometry. And we will begin some more detailed discussions of some more integral topics, and we'll do that in the next series. So I hope to talk to you in the next series.